Hello folks, welcome to Iron Motorsports, which is me, this shop, and my vehicles. First off, my name is Chad Marlowe and I live in North Pole, Alaska. I'll wait while you Google that. On this channel, I'll start by showcasing all my projects up till now, modifications I've made to them and the story behind them, and the plans I have for them in the future. Before I go any further, let me say that I wrench on cars, but I'm not a mechanic. I weld, but I'm no welder. And I tune, but I'm no tuner. At best, I'd say I'm a hobbyist. Most of what I know you could get from a whole lot of car magazines, and any skills I have are from jumping in and learning as I go. So I can hope to educate and instruct, but mostly to entertain. I happen to have the only chassis dyno within 300 miles, so there'll be episodes that deal with dyno tuning. I'll also do real-world testing, because that's what we build them for, right? The first project up will be my 1966 Plymouth Fury 3. This car is actually a build I'm doing for a friend of mine. I bought the car from him about 17 years ago. It was a runner, but it wasn't pretty. It had sat for a number of years at his house. We got it running and it made the drive home. No tags, so it was all back roads. Got it home and immediately tore into it. We had it down to bare bones in a week or two. Then you step back and think, what now? Where to start? First off, there isn't a whole lot of aftermarket support for full-size Mopars. Second, this is my first project car. No knowledge of bodywork, and it needed a bunch. Passenger side of the car had Bondo from the front fender almost all the way to the rear tail lights, varying from just a bit to about 3/8 thick of Bondo. Half the hood was covered in filler. Other than that, the car was solid. Over the next 13 years, I accumulated a lot of parts as I came across them. Bought an engine, built an engine, neither of which would ever end up in the car. Bought a manual transmission swap kit for it, sandblasted the front subframe, and had it painted. Suspension rebuild kit with rubber bushings, because nobody made a kit with polyurethane bushings. Didn't like the reproduction door panels, so I actually sewed some covers up and rewrapped the panels, like that was the most important thing to do. Farmed out the bodywork and only managed to get it put back together enough so I could roll it around when it was in the way of anything else that I wanted to work on. I'd pull it into the shop and just stare at it, asking myself, what next? It was this huge undertaking and I really didn't know how to tackle it. So I'd always get distracted by something easier that I wanted to do to any other project of mine. Those engines that never made it into the car? The first one was a Mopar crate motor. Should be good enough. 380 horse, 360 Magnum. Bought it and it sat in the crate for a couple of years before I decided that it just wasn't enough motor, and it got swapped into another project. Now we have to go bigger. So I got a hold of a 400 big block. This was before the big stroker craze came along, so nobody was really making a variety of kits. What I ended up with was a 440 crank, offset ground to a 3.9 inch stroke, Chevy rods to fit the new smaller rod journal, and diamond pistons. It worked out to 470 cubic inches. Would have been pretty stout, but that was about the time turbos on classic cars were catching traction. Well, the 470 had about 10-to-1 compression, and I couldn't use that without swapping pistons. During my years of gathering parts, I'd acquired a number of other projects, so the Fury got put on the back burner permanently. During these years, the friend that I bought the Fury from went through a number of cars. He's a fan of cars that handle well, so he owned a few different BMWs, and then he ends up with a '99 Porsche Carrera C4. Drove it for a couple summers and then offed it. Not too long after he gets rid of the Porsche, we're out on the town one night and get to talking about what his plans are for his next sporty ride. I tell him he can't take a step back. The next car has to be something faster or that handles better, or both. What's it gonna be? Ferrari? A bigger, badder Porsche? We're basically bench racing off to the side, and my buddy tells me that he still has a soft spot for the old Fury. Now I may or may not have had a bit to drink that night, but right then I made the boast that I could build the Fury to go faster and handle better than that old Carrera. Yeah, I may have bitten off more than I could chew, but I've tried my best so far. I pitch a price and he says okay. He wants a manual transmission, high winding motor, and for it to be turbocharged. Check, check, check. Okay, enough with the story. Here we have the heart of the Fury. It's a 68 383 engine. All that remains of the stock motor is the crank and block. It's got Eagle H-beam rods, diamond pistons at about a 9-to-1 compression, 440 source super stealth heads. It has 440 source roller rockers under the valve covers there, a Mopar M1 intake manifold, MSD Pro Billet distributor, and the throttle body you can see there is a Holley Sniper. It's 1250 horsepower capable with a power adder, obviously. Now if we pan around you can see the exhaust, although it's obscured quite a bit by how cramped it is. See the exhaust, the turbos, wastegates, everything that goes along with a turbocharged setup. This exhaust was actually just a one-off that I built myself, as there wasn't really anything on the market for twin turbocharged Mopars and C-bodies obviously in particular. Like I mentioned before, I actually got a manual transmission swap kit for this car during my collecting years. It's a TKO 600 from, well, what used to be Kiesler Automotive back in the day. They're, I believe, Silver Sport transmissions. But it has an aluminum flywheel and a twin disc, RXT clutch. Should be, well, it's 1,000 horsepower capable anyways. The rear end is just an old 8 3/4 Mopar. It's got a strange third member, an Auburn carrier, and Yukon 355-to-1 gears. The axles themselves are stock 28 splines, so they may be the weak point in that whole assembly. That's it for this installment until I get the Fury up and running and I'm able to dig into it to tie up some loose ends and start a little bit of tuning on the fuel injection and messing with the turbos, boost settings and whatnot. Next up will be an overview of my V8 swapped 70 Datsun pickup.